what they offer in terms of their programming up there. I've known Greg. I actually met Greg at a conference the first time up in Canada, and I don't know if you remember, but we were staying at Frank Towers' house, and I was just, I guess, finishing my first year here at CSUSB. One of the things that most stood out about that interaction or subsequent interactions is, Greg, you've been so supportive, right, of myself and other younger academics, and it means a lot, right? And I think, we talk about mentoring, we talk about the state of the field of academia, and one of the things that I always think about is those senior faculty, those true pillars in the field that are kind enough to reach out to younger scholars to help them, to give advice, and just genuinely be nice. So I've really valued that since that time, and that's how I talk about mentoring in my own work. Anyway, so I'm glad you're here. I wish you were here in person in San Bernardino. I wish all of you were here to sweat it out in the 100-degree heat in the desert with our brush fires and everything. But you'll just have to sit in luxury up north where everybody's vaccinated and there's no COVID issues really. But anyway, without further ado, I'd like to introduce my friend Gregory Downs, who's a professor of history at UC Davis and a preeminent scholar in the field of Civil War and Reconstruction. Most notably, his recent book, After Appomattox, really has defined, I think, the last, 5 to 10 years of work on Reconstruction and the Civil War. We're lucky to have him here. I'm thrilled to introduce you all to him and to have him introduce his colleagues as well. So, Greg.
Well, thank you so much to Ryan and Jeremy for having us and for setting this up. And we are excited to do it. When we started talking about reaching out to Cal States, which emerged last spring out of some of our own engagement with faculty who had mentored people who had applied to PhD programs. I knew that you all were, right at the top of the list of an exciting department with really and an exciting institution. I've got the least important part, so I'll get my part out of the way. I'm mostly here to introduce the fellow Davis people. Be quiet, which is possibly the hardest thing for academics to do. And to convey one message that, will lay within all of the others, which is, if you have interest and if you have questions, reach out. And we might well, say, here's the best person for you to talk to. That's not somebody dissing you, that's somebody trying to help you connect with the person. But we're glad, any of us, to be the conduits, and we'll put in the chat, or I'll put in the chat my email. And I'm glad to be the conduit, even if you don't study anything related to slavery, emancipation, Civil War, Reconstruction. That's okay. There are other interesting things too. I can help to connect you to people who do, all kinds of other fields. So I'll quickly introduce our other Davis people, and then I'll mute myself. Ian Campbell is an associate professor at Davis. And has been at Davis, I would guess, in the ballpark now of 8 or 9 years, though possibly that's plus or minus 1 or 2.
Coming up on the 10-year anniversary here, it's very strange.
And is like Professor Keating, and it sounds like Professor Murray in that exciting part of suddenly getting lots of new responsibilities, and including being the head of our graduate program, which we're very grateful for. He's a specialist in Russia and as well as a thematic specialist in borderlands and empire, and wrote a very highly regarded book in the field, and is at work on a follow-up, a recidivist offender. So we're really pleased that he is in his second year, starting his second year as DGS, and appreciate his excitement at reaching out. and he'll speak to you all in just a second. Or do you want to just go ahead and introduce Daniel and Chantal, or do you want me to, and then you go?
Sure, sure. I'll do that really quickly, and just to say that because of my tendency to talk my face off and things like this, what we're going to do is we're actually going to give you all a perspective from our two outstanding graduate students, two graduate students with some SoCal roots as well, Daniel Castaneda and Chantal Walker. I just want to reiterate quickly what Greg said. Please do reach out to us after this if you have questions. We might be a great department for you to apply to. We might actually be able to tell you, honestly, you'll do better somewhere else. And we would like to help. So we're going to have Chantal and Daniel speak first, and then I think we'll all speak a little bit is as the person who sort of coordinates looking through all the applications and forming cohorts. I'm going to try to give you a little bit of inside information about what makes a really strong application to a PhD program. But that's what's coming up. And for now, we have two outstanding graduate students, Daniel Castaneda, Chantal Walker. I'll let them introduce themselves and take the floor. And we're going to try to leave a good amount of time at the end for your own questions as well.
Chantal, if your internet's working, do you want to go ahead and lead us off? I don't know if it's...
So my internet connection is very unstable, so I hear bits and pieces coming out. If you can hear me clearly, I will go ahead and introduce myself. Thumbs up would be great if I could get...
We can hear.
People can hear? No. I don't know if people can hear me. I'm gonna write in the chat. Great. Okay, so people can hear me. So my name is Chantal Walker. I am a fourth-year PhD student in the history department at UC Davis, and I study the American West. But as some brief background about me is I was an undergrad at Cal State Dominguez Hills, where I received my bachelor's degree in history, and then I went on to UCLA and received a master's degree in American Indian Studies. And I'm going to allow my colleague Daniel to introduce himself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Daniel Castaneda. I'm from Southern California. I grew up in Orange County in Fullerton, for those of you who have heard of it. I did my undergraduate at UC Riverside in History and Public Policy, and I'm now a third year here in the History PhD program at UC Davis. And my research is primarily in United States political history of the 1970s through the 1990s. And so one of the things that we just kind of wanted to start with is we tried to, put a lot of information here as broadly as possible. So everything that we have, there's plenty more that there are plenty more branches that could sort of go off here. But we just want to express that we're here to kind of give you as much information as possible to help you make the best and most informed decision. For those of you who are interested in Davis, obviously we'd like to encourage you to consider applying and reaching out to us. But we hope that regardless of what your choice is, that we can give you information that we think will be helpful. So Chantal, do you want to start with what we do in the PhD program?
Yes, so what we do in the PhD program, we read and write a lot. Expect reading about a book per week per class, and most students take 2 to 3 seminars a class. There's also something called comprehensive exams or preliminary exams, depending on what school you go to. But it means the same, just to demonstrate your mastery in the field that you're specializing in, and in the field of history most broadly. Your dissertation proposal, and then you also, your dissertation was with your PhD. I mean, that's the culmination of everything, of all your hard work, is your dissertation. But with many schools, there's also a teaching or service component. So you could be a teacher's assistant. You could also potentially be a graduate student researcher, or you could be a reader. A reader is just essentially you grade papers, you provide feedback on any exams, and you assist the professor with what they need. And a teacher's assistant is where you lead discussion sections. And then because my internet's unstable, I'm gonna allow Daniel to go over into the why you should apply to a PhD program, because I can only hear bits and pieces of things cutting in and out for me.
Got it. Thank you, Chantal. So yeah, so we kind of have organized the next few things here. I'll try to go through it as quickly as possible because we want to leave as much time as questions for you all. But the first thing is just why should you apply to a PhD program? Ideally, you want to have an idea of what it is. Start there. Figure out what graduate school is. You might think of professors who can give you an idea of what that looks like. One of the things that I generally tend to encourage people is to avoid making it like the next logical step. Because, you know, one of the things that I really encourage people to think about is you really want to go to graduate school because you want to. I mean, as Chantal mentioned, you know, you're going to be reading a lot of books, you're going to be writing a lot. And if you don't enjoy what you do, it's going to be a very miserable experience. So you want to have a realistic idea of what the discipline is and what the career opportunities are. As you'll hear a lot, you know, people will talk about the job market and how the job market is really daunting. I won't get into too much of that right now because we have other people who can talk about that. And if people have questions, we're happy to go over it. But you want to know kind of what you're getting yourself into before you apply. So I think that's sort of the first step. The second thing is you want to pursue your research interests. So one of the things that you'll realize in the application process is almost every program is going to ask you to write a research statement, and they want to know what you're going to research. If you were to be accepted, what kind of project would you have? And I usually try to remind people of two things on this one, which is, you know, your project is likely going to change. Mine definitely has significantly, and that's okay. That's part of the process. But really what they're looking for is that you have an idea of what you want to research and what you would do if you were accepted into a program. The other thing that I encourage people to think about is to have some background if possible. If you can write a senior thesis, or if you can, you know, work with a professor and write an in-depth research paper, you really want to know if that's something that you want to do. So what I tell people is that I, you know, wrote my senior thesis, particularly because I wanted to know, like, if I can't write, you know, a 20 to 35 page research paper, writing a book length dissertation is probably not for me. So that's something that you want to keep in mind, is that if you can get opportunities to do that, and you find out that you like it, that might be a good reason to apply to a PhD program, because you know that these are the things that you're interested in, and you want to have the opportunity for multiple years to kind of invest in a project. Chantal and I had some comments here on personal experiences, so I'll mention Chantal's, which is that she wanted you all to consider that, you know, if you're going to spend 5 or more years of your life on a project like this, you really want to know that this is something that you want to do. And this is something that you care about and are invested in, because otherwise, as we mentioned, it can be a very challenging experience. And one of the things that I like to highlight is there were a lot of different things that I could have chosen to do after graduation. And for me, this was an opportunity to kind of pursue research and have the opportunity to have a stable paycheck. You know, I'm able to have the opportunity to work with students. I'm able to apply the things that I'm learning. And I think that there are very few jobs that will afford you that opportunity and independence to sort of pursue the projects that you're interested in. And so I think that that's something that, if that's like, that excites you and that's something that you want to do, that's certainly something worth considering. So next we have kind of a section on how to prepare yourself for the application. So my first point is ask for lots, and I mean lots of advice. Talk to professors in your current department, you know, go and ask them. They can help you determine your strengths and weaknesses. Your professor might say, hey, well, wait a minute, you might want to take some time to really think about what you're talking about. They can tell you things that you might not have known about like what it's like to be on the job market. They can tell you things about, you know, whether or not this is really a career that you want to pursue, or they can help you strategize for the things that you want to apply for. And the other thing that I tell people is you want to talk to professors anyway, because most likely you're going to need letters of recommendation. And this is a good way to open that conversation. The other thing that I always point out is that it can be intimidating, but it's a useful part of the process. Because again, as you get into graduate school, you're going to work with professors very closely. Like I mentioned, I work with, you know, I don't work directly with Greg and Ian, but I feel very comfortable talking to them and approaching them. And that's something that you want to keep in mind as you're applying to programs, because you're going to work a lot more closely with the faculty in a graduate program than you might have as an undergraduate. The other thing that I always encourage people to do is talk to graduate students. So you all are at a program where there are master's students. So I would highly encourage you to consider talking to master's students and figuring out, you know, what is graduate school like? What do seminars look like? What is it like to write a thesis? And get, you know, good information from people who you can trust. Also, they can tell you the things that are, you know, that you might not have thought about in terms of applying, but also what a program can be like. The second thing is to familiarize yourself with the programs that you're interested in. if you're close enough, visit the campus, go see what it's like. I usually tell people to wait until you're really serious about a program, or unless you've been accepted to visit, because it can be a lot of money. And for me, I was a first generation college student, so that wasn't, I had limited funds that I could to use for that. So if you don't do that, that's fine. Don't stress out. It's not the end of the world. Visit their websites, see what their faculty looks like, see how many graduate students they have, see what their program's fields of expertise are. So that's something that you'll want to keep in mind, is not every program has every type of faculty that you might be looking for. So I studied political history, so I needed to be very intentional about the programs that I chose, because not every program has a robust political history faculty. So that's something to think about. Also look over the applications, take some time, before you apply, just to look at what the applications are asking for, see what information that seems common to multiple applications. You'll find out that a lot of what you write will be recycled. And some people are better at that than others, but that's something that you'll want to do, is consider, you're going to write a lot of things like diversity statements, research statements, and you'll find that a lot of these are going to be very similar, but you also do want to tailor your application to whichever program that you're applying to. So this is a good way to do that, is by familiarizing yourself with all the programs before you submit off an application. Once you've decided, these are the programs I'm interested in and I want to go further, one of the first things that I would highly recommend that you do is reach out to the faculty of interest via email. Just before you do, actually, I should step back. Before you do that, familiarize yourself with their research. You don't need to read all of their books and know everything about them, but you should have some sense of, oh, this is what this faculty member does. I might have read an article or two, or maybe I read, one of their books in one of the classes that I took. That's a good way just for you to know, to have a, a way of opening the door and showing that you have done your part to familiarize yourself with the person that you're emailing, because you are, as you all know, faculty members are very busy. You really want to make sure that you are making it worth their while and your while at the same time. One of the things that I always encourage people to do is to ask if they're currently accepting graduate students. That is a quick way to find out whether you should submit an application or not. Because if they're not accepting graduate students, then you could write the best application there ever was, but you won't be accepted. Or you might be accepted with somebody else, but you really want to know if they're accepting graduate students, because that'll help you filter out where to go. And the other thing here is faculty might not respond for various reasons. They might be busy, they might have missed your email. And especially if you're applying with big name faculty, they get hundreds of emails a day. So don't let that deter you. That's not necessarily a reason not to apply, but you do want to have an idea of who does reply and who you do engage with, because that can help in terms of you deciding whether that's a right fit for you. The second thing that I would say here is make a plan for applying. So, what Chantal and I actually both did, which we found out yesterday in a different information session, is we both use Excel sheets. So I had, each school had a little tab on the bottom, and I had the deadlines, the fees, and like all the stuff that I needed for the application. So that way I knew, in my head and in sort of one place, this is how I need to keep everything balanced. I think I applied roughly to 9 schools. So it's hard, right? It's a lot of information, and you'll find out that a lot of the deadlines are the exact same day or relatively close. Some people will be like November 15th, December 15th, and January 1st or something like that. And so you'll want to be able to have that, clearly labeled, so that way you don't fall behind. The second thing on this point is arranging your letters of recommendation as soon as you possibly can. So what I usually tell people is 4 to 6 weeks before whatever deadline that you have. Because you'll find out some people are anybody who's willing to write a letter for you is hopefully in support of you, but some people are more on it than others. So I had some faculty members who were really good about submitting it, like I didn't have to follow up with them, whereas others I had to follow up multiple times. That's perfectly normal, and that doesn't mean anything most likely about you, but that's something to think about. What I also say on this point is make sure that you ask if your recommender can write a strong letter of support on your behalf. You don't want to have somebody who's just like, oh, I'll just write the letter. And good faculty members will ask you, well, why do you want me to write a letter? And hopefully you can have a conversation about that. But you really want to be intentional about the people that you're choosing. And I can talk more about that in the questions if people have questions on that. And then my final point on this, on the letters of rec, is don't wait till the last minute. Like I mentioned just before, you might have to follow up with people, so you don't want to put yourself in a position where everything's done except that one letter of rec. some programs are more flexible on that, and they take into account some professors might be late, so they don't penalize you for that, but others don't. So that's something that you'll want to be very familiar with on the applications, kind of what their rules and their processes are. The next thing is send in your applications early, if at all possible, because if you work ahead, you can give yourself time for reviewers, which I think is a very important process. A very important part of the process here is you can ask trusted faculty members or graduate students to look over your statements of purpose, research, and diversity. You know, I always tell people, like, even now I'm in a graduate program and I feel very comfortable with my writing, but I never send anything off without having at least one other person review it, just because I think that's it's a good way for you to, hear like, hey, this isn't really landing the way that you thought it was landing. Or, for example, if your statement of purpose isn't really written as a statement of purpose, you can find that out from somebody who can tell you, so that way you don't submit it off to a committee and it's not really achieving what it's supposed to. And then it also, especially for your writing sample, any program you're going to apply to in history is going to ask you for a writing sample. It varies from program to program, but you're looking at somewhere between 20 to 30 pages roughly of a sample. And so that's something that you don't necessarily have to keep it exactly as the way you submitted it for whatever class you might have done it for. So you want to have time to review that and edit it and make sure that, your arguments are clear and the things that you want the committee to see are clear to them. You want to avoid any technical issues. So, you never know if the application is going to crash when everybody's submitting all at once. And you don't want to be the person who has to email a committee and say, hey, I waited until 11:50. Can you please help me out? That's not a good way to go in. So keep that in mind. And like I mentioned earlier, lots of deadlines and a lot of them at the same time. So the more time you give yourself, the better off you'll be. Some things to ask yourself in the application process that I think are really important. Is, can you see yourself living in this place? And how far can you be from your family, partner, dog, I don't know, other people for an extended period of time? Because that's something that's very important. So for me, I was very intentional about choosing Davis because it was close to Sacramento and it was still in California and it felt like a good fit for me. But other people might love the city and want to go to New York, for instance, or you might say, I do not want that kind of life. So those are things that you'll want to keep in mind. Another thing that I think is really important is what kind of relationship you want to have with your advisor. So the way that I kind of cut this is, do you want somebody who's very hands-on? Do you want somebody, who's hands-off? Do you want somebody who's very involved, or some mix of that? You can get that kind of information from graduate students or other people who work, or you might find out when you email that person kind of what their style is. And that's not always something that you can gauge off. So I don't want to say that you have to do that or that's something that needs to be done. But I think it's something worth considering as you go forward, especially when you come to like decisions. That's something that you'll want to keep in mind. One of the other things that we brought up is, would you be more comfortable working on the quarter system versus a semester system? So here at Davis, we're on a 10-week quarter, which I think San Bernardino is on semesters. Is that right? Okay, yeah.
Just started last year. We just started last year.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay, yeah. So all of the UCs, I believe, except for Berkeley, are on quarter system. So it's a lot, right? You have roughly 2 to 3 classes. You have 10 weeks to finish those classes and the finals week. So, compared to a 15, 16-week semester, that's a big change. So hopefully shouldn't be something that deters you from applying to a program, but that is something that you should be familiar with. And just know. And, we have plenty of people in our program who have switched from semester to quarter and they do well and thrive. So it's not something that hopefully should scare you off. One of the other things that I bring up a lot, and other people have different views on this, but I think it's worth mentioning, is at the school that you're interested in, is there more than one professor of interest that you would want to work with? There are multiple reasons for this. One is that, eventually down the line, you'll have to form a dissertation committee. You want to have people who are not, you don't want to have just one person that you can rely on to form a good committee with you. The other thing is you just never know, right? Some people might not end up, having a good relationship with their advisor. I'm not, that doesn't happen to everybody, and I don't want to say that it will happen to you, but that's something that you want to keep in mind, because if you have more than one person that you can work with, that's always good. And I think that the other thing that I would just say on that is it's also worth remembering that people move, things happen. When I was deciding, one of the things that I was worried about is I was worried that one of the faculty members I was going to work with might go to a different school. So those are things you'll want to keep in mind. And all of these things that I'm saying, I really encourage you to talk to professors or other people who have been through this, because everybody's situation is different. So that's just something that I think is worth mentioning. And then another thing to think about is, are there programs or centers that are available to support you through graduate school? So for instance, the LGBTQ plus resource center, undocumented student programs, cultural office, disability resources, because, again, everybody has a different experience, but the more that you can kind of, develop a support network wherever you decide or eventually choose to go to, that would be really good for you. So some final thoughts here. Consider programs that give you the opportunity to learn about the campus. I'm going to copy one into the chat here, called the UC Davis Envision program, which is one of the big reasons I chose to go here. So it's open to California students, and you get the opportunity to, fly out to Davis and meet faculty members. So the application's already closed for this year because they're doing it in October. But if you're, applying within the next 2 years, I think is how they define it. That might be something for you to consider, especially if you're interested in Davis. Another school that I know that does it is the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. So these are programs that, give you the opportunity to go out, usually they'll pay for you to stay in a hotel and that kind of thing. So look into those if they are available, because, you'll find out really quickly if that's something that the school is a good fit, or you have faculty members that can support you. The other thing is, some of this really is a matter of luck and timing. And if you don't get accepted, that does not mean that you are unintelligent or you're not a good scholar, you're not capable of doing graduate work. There's so many different factors that go into this. Like if, you happen to apply in a year where there's so many people applying to work under one person, or like I mentioned earlier, that person's not even accepting students, that's something that could, keep you from getting into a program. Also, here at Davis, we've had, a few years here of really excellent candidates, and so it's just been really challenging for the committees to narrow down. So don't let that deter you, or don't take that as a sign that this is the end. So a lot of it is just the year that you apply and whoever else is applying. Again, we can answer all the questions that you're interested in, and whatever you all want to know. But we thought this would be a good starting point, just to say, here's a bunch of information. So I know we've thrown a lot at you, but we also have our contact information in the chat, and we're both happy to answer any questions that you have. Also, if you just want to talk to graduate students, or if you want to know who's working with who or that kind of thing, let us know, because we can connect you. And if we can't directly answer your questions, we'll definitely refer you to somebody who can. So that's all we have, Ian. So I'm happy to turn it over to you.
All right, well, thank you for all that, Daniel and Chantal. It doesn't leave me with a whole lot left to say, to be honest, which is good. So I'm just going to try to speak for 5 minutes. If I talk for more than 5 minutes, give me 10,000 volts. And what I want to try to speak to is some stuff where I might have a little more insider knowledge, which is what successful applications look like, where sometimes good applications kind of get caught up into difficulty, and what to do when you are accepted to programs, right? So the thing to say about applications, about applying to graduate schools, to PhD programs, there is a trend in the humanities and social sciences in particular, and generally it's a good trend, to move away from kind of the strictly quantitative ways of evaluating applicants to what's called holistic admissions principles. Many departments at this point, us among them, we don't even ask you to submit GRE scores anymore. And by and large, this is a good thing. It means that it's making people look into the application materials more deeply. It means that we're not rejecting people who maybe flunked chemistry their first semester of college and then discovered what they really are as a historian. Like, we're not just saying, oh, well, she's got a 3.8, but he's got a 3.4, so let's take her and not him, right? This is a better way of doing things, and we are getting stronger, more diverse, overall more capable cohorts on this model. But what this does mean is that there is a lot riding on a few documents that you submit. It means that a lot winds up riding on your statement of purpose, your writing sample, because those are the things that people are really going to dig into when they're trying to decide whether or not you're worth investing in. And that's really the kind of decision that we wind up making. graduate stipends may seem very small. Once you live on one, you will discover that they seem, that they don't just seem small, they actually are quite small, but taken together, they're significant investments. And we want to find people who seem likely to contribute to the program, who seem likely to succeed, to justify that investment or to grow together with us. And so we are getting into these materials quite deeply. And so just a couple of things to say. When you're writing a statement of purpose, do try to be as specific as possible, both about what it is that you want to do, and I think this is also critical, to try to show some understanding about why you think the thing you want to do is important. As Daniel said, this will certainly change. This is, everybody understands, this is a natural part of kind of your intellectual growth. But what your people are interested in seeing is that this person actually can conceive of an interesting research problem, has thought a bit about why it would be important. And so, the more specific you can be, the better. Or even if you have a couple of things you might want to do within a specific kind of time period or place, that helps. What you want to avoid is saying, yes, I'm interested in a PhD to do colonial US or possibly early modern Russia or maybe modern Japan. One of those three things I will write a dissertation on. That will not fly. So you want to kind of have identified a topic within an area that the place specializes in. This is the other thing. Do that research ahead. So for example, if you were applying to Davis for things like environmental history, Latin American history, 19th century US, 20th century US for that matter, really any US, you can do really well with us. You can do a lot of interesting stuff on the history of war and violence with us. Those are places that are good fits. If your passion is, say, British history, and you write an application to Davis that has a really passionately stated and well-defined idea of what you want to do for a dissertation on British history, you will get rejected because we don't employ a historian of Britain right now. So this is another thing to just do your research ahead of time. Another thing I would say generally to avoid is just the idea that X hasn't been studied before, and therefore I'm going to study it. That tends to set off alarm bells with people, because A, sometimes when you say something hasn't been studied, all that means is you haven't found the book. And B, we're really interested in knowing why you think a thing is important. So those are things to do with your statement of purpose. The other thing to talk about is the writing sample. A writing sample, ideally, it would be something that has some relationship to what you want to study, even if it's not kind of bang on. If you are wanting to write a dissertation on US history, showing us, a paper that shows us your knowledge of that is useful. But what is most important is kind of the skills that your writing sample shows. You want to have a writing sample that shows that you are able to work with primary sources. You want to have a writing sample that shows that you understand that history is about arguments and evaluating competing arguments and making your own. So in that sense, even a really good course paper that you've written, if it doesn't kind of stuff, is probably not the best thing to submit. Another kind of hot tip there: if the research you're proposing to do in graduate school involves some specific skill, it is best to have a writing sample that is displaying at least the beginnings of that skill. And I would say, particularly in my field, I'm a Russianist, languages become critical. If you're proposing to do a dissertation on Russian or Japanese or Middle Eastern history, it is helpful to show that you have at least begun doing some work in that language, because you unfortunately cannot assume that a person will, in 3 years of coursework, start from zero and completely master a difficult language, however good their historical sense might be otherwise. So demonstrating that can be useful, can kind of, in a lot of sense, what you're wanting to do is with these applications is kind of assuage doubts, right? Show that, yeah, I'm a good risk to take. I've already shown signs that I can do X and Y, and I need your help taking the next step, right? A very quick thing to think about references, as Daniel said, give your references lots of time. It is best to have people who you have known for a long time, who could, even if maybe you didn't have perfect grades, if maybe you had four classes with one professor, you know them well, and you perhaps made a couple B's and then sort of gradually improved, that person will write a better reference than somebody who maybe you made an A in one class, but you never actually spoke to them. The other kind of maybe red flag or like thing to keep in mind here, if you have written a major paper of some kind, if you have written an undergraduate thesis, if you have written or are writing an MA thesis, it will generally be a red flag to an admissions committee if the person who supervised that does not write a reference for you. There are circumstances under which that happens. People retire or become sick or whatever else. If that happens, you want to explain kind of, briefly in a statement of purpose, what happened and who's writing for you instead, because the idea is that at least that person ought to be able to speak very well to your ability to do graduate level work. And quickly, the 10,000 volts are coursing through because I've gone over 5 minutes. Couple things to say about once you are in. Daniel has already mentioned, and it's worth reading and it's worth repeating. Talk to other graduate students about the program or programs that you've been accepted to. Try to visit if you can. Quotidian concerns about whether you actually like to live in the place where you're working, that can have a really tremendous bearing on your success in grad school. And similarly, kind of getting some ideas about your potential advisor, meeting them, but also hearing from other graduate students about them, that's also very important. Your relationship with your advisor will be very close. And say, if you speak to 5 graduate students and they all say, oh yeah, that person's they seem to be in conflict with everybody, then, really consider whether you want to commit yourself to something like that. And like this stuff does happen. You want to have all that information. Graduate students get a lot of sources. Some people are eternal optimists, some people are eternal pessimists, but get a lot of information as you're making that decision. And the last thing I really do want to emphasize, should you be lucky enough to be accepted to multiple places, a lot of people, especially if they don't have academic families, are not aware of this. I did not know this when I applied to graduate school. It is totally in bounds. It is totally legitimate. It is actually encouraged to leverage the funding offers you get from different places against one another. You will never have a better opportunity to take your graduate stipend from minuscule to slightly less minuscule. You've got the places on the hook right then. And the thing is, generally, once a place has admitted you, they've already invested some resources in you. They would like to bring you in. And in particular, I, as graduate chair, really liked being able to say, to people higher up than me, you need to loosen the purse strings a little bit. You need to help us recruit this person. And you have to be realistic about what happens, about what places can do. If someone comes to us and say, look, I really want to come to Davis, but Princeton is offering me $45,000 a year or whatever, I don't have $45,000 for you in any account, personal or otherwise. But if you say, look, I'm being offered summer funding here. Can you find a way to fund my first summer of research or my first or second summer of research? Can you guarantee an extra TA slot at some point? That's the kind of thing that most places can and should do. And if you have the ability to ask, don't be ashamed about talking about money. Don't feel that you should be grateful for any offer that you get. Ask. The worst thing that will happen is that they'll say, we can't do it, but nobody thinks that it's vulgar and shouldn't be spoken of. You are meant to ask and talk about these things. And I say that because it's hard enough to live on a graduate stipend. It will not be the most remunerative period of your life, although it may be satisfying in many other ways. And I am passionate about graduate students getting all the resources that they can extract from institutions, whether that's us or anything else. And now, having taken 10 minutes instead of 5, I will shut up. And I think at this point, we just want to open it up for questions. Yeah.
That would be great. Jeremy, what's the best way? Do you want people to just unmute and talk? Do you want to call on people? I think we're open.
We could do the virtual hand raise if people want to jump right in. If you want to raise your hand with a little emoji thing, Megan jumped right on it. We could do that and try to address people in line. We do have a pretty tight 5:30 wrap up time, and so hopefully we'll go quickly. But Megan, why don't you lead us off, and others if you want to raise your hands. Raise your hands or you can type questions in the chat. Megan.
So on the topic of a thesis and an undergraduate or even a master's thesis, would that be something good to include, or would it be preferable to do a different aspect of writing or a different piece of writing?
If you've got it, that's a great thing to submit. The only thing to consider is that most theses of that sort will be longer than kind of the limit that places set for writing samples. So it's great to submit that. It's often maybe the best thing you could submit. You just have to think a little bit about how to slim it down a bit. And that may mean it doesn't read totally perfectly, but people are used to reading these kind of redacted. So, I advise something like, if you can slip, say, your introduction and then like your favorite chapter and get that under the word limit, or like if you cut like some bit of like word fat, my advisor's favorite word, out of the introduction and get it under the word limit that way. That's a pretty effective way of showing what you're about, your ability to argue, your ability to do research. But yeah, those are reckoning with the page limits. Those are really useful writing samples to submit.
Yeah, I mean, basically, I think I always tell people you want to show you can ask a good question, you can relate it to the historiography, and you can try and start answering it through using primary sources. And whatever you need to do to sort of get that, ours is 15 to 30, some places is max at 20, you may have to do some, tinkering like Ian said. I see a question in the chat about language fluency. I do US history. I do some work in other languages, but it's probably best to have a non-US person answer this. Do you want to jump on that, Ian?
Okay, so this is something that varies tremendously, I think, by field. Fluency is rarely expected, but I would say that you should at least have the ball rolling. Ideally, you'll at least show a little bit of facility in doing some research in the language, even if it's like at an early stage. But then I think that's something where too, it can be especially important to let the statement of purpose do some work for you, show some understanding of where you are now, where you think you need to be, and how you think you are going to get there. And Jeremy is a China historian, I think. Yeah, so I think a lot of this will apply to his field as well. You have to at least be started and to show some indication of what you're going more. Or for example, so when I applied to PhD programs off of my bachelor's, I had 3 years of Russian as an undergrad, which is woefully insufficient to actually work in an archive, but is a start that shows up on the transcript. And I also knew that I would be doing some work on borderlands, which involves work in non-Russian languages. So, here's the Russian work I've done. Here's the coursework that I plan to do in graduate school. And, I'm enrolling in this summer program this summer to get the ball rolling on the non-Russian language. And that convinced 2 schools out of 8, which, it's fair enough. But yeah, you don't have to be fluent, but you do need to show that you understand that language proficiency is important and your plan for getting there.
We have a question, and Daniel's already started to answer it, from Mariano Penado on how many times review the statement of purpose. Do you want to, just in case anybody is not able to see the chat, do you want to it's about the statement of purpose and getting it right. want to start answering that, Daniel? And if we
Yeah. So I think there's not really a hard and fast rule here. I think it's a matter of what you have available to you. What I usually say is 1 to 3 people, because anything more than that starts to get, that's too much feedback, which surprisingly there is such a thing. But usually 1 to 2 is a good ballpark, because I think that way you at least have an idea of what your weak spots might be, or things you might have missed, and some or there's somebody else might say, hey, this was really great. And somebody might tell you, well, this was actually weak because you missed this point. And those are good things to catch before you submit. But, again, it's all a matter about the time that you have. If you don't have enough time to do that, it's okay. You can be all right. But I just think that if you have that time and you can budget that time ahead, that's, always better to have that as much as possible.
And what do you feel like you remember about your process of doing your personal statement? And Chantal, I don't know if you're able to hear us, but if so, you're welcome to chime in too. Like, when did it click to you of like, oh, this is what this is?
Yeah, well, I think so. One, what I did was I read all of the like statements of purpose directions per school, because they're slightly different. So it's not the exact same document for everybody. So I think that's a good thing to do, because if you do copy paste for each school, it'll be clear like, oh, this person didn't read ours closely. So do that. The second thing is just talking it out with people before I started. So like, here's what I want to write in my statement of purpose, and somebody can tell you, no, you're going down the wrong path. I'm always a huge fan of outlines. I think it's a good place to start, but that's just a matter of personal preference. But I think overall, what I would say is, talk to your professors, talk to other graduate students who have gone through this process, who can help you, soundboard ideas and help you avoid pitfalls and things like that. Just because, again, there's not really a one size fits all approach to this.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think sometimes people do get distracted by the word personal. And it is a professional statement, right? You've got a writing sample that shows what you can do with something you've already done. And your personal statement is your chance to say what you want to do. And maybe that's related and you explain through, and maybe it's actually quite different. And that's cool too. But the only way we'll know is if you tell us. So being willing to be, more precise. Sometimes they get very general and it's hard to know what a student's interested in. A little more precise about what your interests are. Sometimes the magic ones have, this little sort of moment of when, they start to understand how history works and their ideas of where to go. It's often a nice gesture, though it's also other places the application you can do it, to close with a different paragraph for each one that says why that place is the perfect place for you to do your research, and name the faculty that you would like to work with. And it's totally fine. And with me, I won't tell anybody. If you tell us we're the perfect place and you tell, Berkeley or UCLA or Irvine or wherever they're the perfect place, the key thing is you're signaling you're applying to a specific place for a specific reason, not just your mass mailing.
Yeah, because all of us will have written job statements explaining that every job that we're applying to is the perfect place for us. We're used to this sort of deception.
There's one last piece I would say is you'll be asked on Davis to list faculty that you want to work with. This is actually hugely important, because there is the people that work with Ian on the graduate committee. What happens is your application gets read by 2 people at the start. Usually it is the first 2 people you list. And if you list them in some other order, there's no, if there's somebody you've been engaged with and you note that, Ian will see that and kick it up. But you have a chance to kind of steer your application to the people you want and list those people in the top 2 and 3.
Can I jump in on that also? And I wanted to maybe give you a few minutes to think about what the most important markers of long-term grad success are, and maybe we can wrap up with that. What the most important markers in the application, but then also in the long-term success, which may be slightly different. But to your point, Greg, about faculty that you might have reached out to, I often encourage students, be somewhat presumptuous in emailing your heroes in academia, especially if this is a program you might want to you might want to apply to. But do you have some maybe words of advice about how to go about that initial approach in the most productive way? Well, I'll leave it there.
I like what Daniel said, and there's no one magic way, but right, are you are you interested in receiving applications for grad students? Because somebody is like, actually, I put him to retire in 3 years or something, right? And that opens it. I generally try and respond if it's somebody outside of my field to say, you sound great, and here's actually the person who's much more likely than me to be one of those first 2 readers, which is really important because I can't really be the key advocate. We have like 6 historians of the US West, right? I can't be the lead advocate. They need to be pitching that this is a great young historian of the West to admit, right? Similarly, if it's this person who does slavery emancipation, if it's Professor Leroy who does that, or me, or, there's a handful of people, but if it's somebody way out of left field, that would also be odd. So, sometimes I do say, reach out to this other person, not because I'm not interested, but because that's the person who's going to be more helpful getting you in. And then I often try and respond and say, if I, look at our tips about what the personal statement and writing sample are, if I have time, and it looks interesting, I might say, feel free to send it to me. And if I have a chance, I'll try and give you a quick tip. I wouldn't lead with that because that will scare some people off who don't want that kind of engagement.
Yeah, and I think everything that Greg has said is really on point. The other bits I would add to it, and some of this may be my personal idiosyncrasies. One, do that little bit of homework. You are more likely to get help from somebody like Greg if you say, hey, I work on the 19th century US West, so it's something that shows you're at least familiar with him as a US historian. You're more likely to get help with that than something like, hey, Professor Downs, I'm interested in researching the Boxer Rebellion. That betrays a kind of a lack of seriousness that might not be welcome. The other, and this is more my idiosyncrasy. People get a lot of email. They kind of run together. I would say generally avoid ass kissing, for lack of a better way to put it. Avoid the kind of fulsome praise. Just get to the point, say who you are, make the ask, are you interested in taking applications? You're much more likely to get a response that you could use.
I saw Daniel about to jump in.
Yeah, I was just going to say, as somebody who's recently done this, I think that one thing to consider is if faculty who are connected to that faculty member. A lot of the times I had faculty members who were like, oh, just mention that so and so, and obviously make sure they're okay with that. Don't do that, or don't assume that's something you can do. But that also could be something that's an entry point for you, because networks do matter in this field, as you'll find out, especially on the other end of the fence. But the other thing to consider is, just as Greg said, keeping it to the point, right? There's no reason to beat around the bush. These professors are very familiar with this process. They've gone through it themselves. They get plenty of emails. So don't, feel like you need to write this whole essay. The other thing that I think is really important is to be clear about what your research interests are. And to, if you can, tailor that to the person that you're applying to. So, when I was applying, in some places I was a little bit more, forward about me being a historian of capitalism. I don't necessarily do that now, but at the time I was very, focused on the fact that there were professors who would be more responsive to that. That's just something that, I'm saying specifically for my field, don't, if that's not what you do, don't say that's what you do. But those are things that you might want to keep in mind, is that if there's a better way for you to pitch your project to a particular person, those are things that you'll want to, be able to do, and that will come from reading their work and stuff like that. But I can't stress enough, it is worth doing that. Don't just assume what this person does. If you can at least get a better idea of this is what they do, you might find out really quickly, oh, I actually don't want to do what this person does. So if you can, do that background research.
Chantal, I'm not sure if you're still able to, if you want to unmute and
I'm
say
still here. I can
for it.
hear better with my camera off, but I'm very much still here. I apologize for this.
Don't apologize. Do you have any parting wisdom? I didn't want us to move toward closing.
Can people hear?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, because everyone froze all at once, so now that worried me. But yes, I'm sorry, I was very silent for most of this presentation, so I thank Daniel immensely for taking over. But if anyone has any questions for me, feel free to email. I'm happy to talk to you, and if I can't answer your question, I'll point you in the right direction to someone who can. So I just really appreciate this opportunity.
Yeah. And yeah, what I started with, thank you so much, Chantal. Thank you so much, Daniel. Just for my, reach out. If you're thinking about applying, December, January, you should be reaching out, before October gets too far into it. So reach out soon, and reach out to many places. You're going to want to apply to lots of places. It's competitive. It gets more competitive every year, it seems like. And so, your way to find out where it's going to work is by starting the process. And if any of us can help, let us know.
Thank you so much, guys. I want to ask one more time, if in just a second, for a roundup lightning round from our guests about the most important markers of long-term success. I wanted to quickly note just something, because Daniel had a really great point about knowing that that's a place you want to live. I also want to note an openness to being at a stage in your life where unexpected things happen, because I did not think I was going to end up at San Diego. I did not think I was going to end up on the West Coast. I'm a New York kid, and I had an advisor say, just apply to UCSD, and I said, oh, okay, fine. And I put the application together, and it was a match. It was a really great match. So also be open to the unexpected, and don't close doors based on things. I was just talking to Alexander this morning about it, and he said, I'm not going back to Chicago. And I said, okay, fine. That door is definitely closed. But also think about closing doors at a stage in your life where unexpected things can happen. You're learning who you are. You're growing as a scholar, as a person. All these exciting things can happen. So that's that. I appreciate Daniel's point, and I also want to say, sort of be open to the unexpected. My things in terms of most important markers of long-term grad success, I'm going to lead off here, and then I want to do around the horn. But is a readiness to ask for help when you need it. Don't hide. Don't get in the weeds. I used to be a waiter. Don't get in the weeds without asking somebody to help you run some dishes out. Don't get in the weeds without asking for help. Don't get weeded, which doesn't mean what you think it means. But don't get in the weeds without asking for help. Ask for help, and that I think is a crucial marker of success, for long-term success. And then also a really boring one, that is meeting deadlines. Whether they're self-imposed and you give yourself a little breathing room, or there's somebody else, meet those deadlines, obviously with your applications. But those are my long-term markers for success. Do you guys have any words of wisdom just to leave us with? We're just a minute over, but
two quick things. Three. That's awesome. Not going to improve on that list. I would say, I always tell my students, you need a project that looks good on paper, and you also need a project you care about. Nobody can care about it more than you, and it's really hard to do something that sounds perfect, but your heart isn't in it. That's not, you got to explain it to people whose heart isn't in it, but believe, And the second, which is related, is it's a marathon, not a sprint. And, what are the things like the deadlines and that asking for help that are going to help you keep going? Because it can be a kind of tortoise and the hare scenario where the people who really keep at it end up thriving and getting better and better.
Yep. These are all great points. And a thing you'll notice in all of these, by the way, is that neither Professor Murray nor Professor Downs nor I will talk about like just such and so, someone who is a super genius, that's the first thing, because it's actually not. The other thing that I would add to this is some comfort working in an unstructured environment and an ability to create structure for oneself. That's being a term I hate, but a self-starter in that way. That's probably the biggest difference between a doctoral program and any other coursework you'll have done in the past. That there are very few times where somebody is going to be telling you, on this day, you got to do this thing. That's up to you to decide. And like that freedom can be wonderful, but it can also be terrible, because you can spend a month not doing all that much. No one will make you. So you need to be comfortable making that structure for yourself, or to get comfortable making that structure for yourself, and develop whatever practice works for you. That's also, and just again, Greg said the idea that it is a marathon and not a sprint, the idea that this is really almost a geological process, right? You're building up little bits day by day. So to develop the ability to work at that pace and to kind of make your little contribution every day, being consistent, having that kind of Sitzfleisch is people. I am not as smart as any number of people who didn't make it out of our PhD program. But I can do that. And this is something you see happen.
Daniel and Chantal, any last minute words in terms of markers, things, and these might be, close to the bone. I remember Ian's, that's close to the bone, structuring an unstructured environment, because when you're a TA, it'll take all your time if you let it. So it's hard to claim that time. Daniel, Chantal?
Yeah, I was going to say, so I think the last thing, just to kind of build on what you were mentioning, was being an advocate for yourself, being able to ask for help. But the thing that I think is also really important is not comparing yourself to others. Everyone's experience is really different, and you have to, learn to work with your committee. You have to learn to work with all these different people, and your experience is going to be different than everybody else, right? So if you're comparing yourself to the person who got their paper published their first year, that's not everybody, and for all that person might look back a few years later and say, well, I don't know why I did that. I shouldn't have gotten that published, year one. So these are things that, you find out as you go further. I'm only in my third year, but there are things now that I wish I could go back and tell my first year self, because, it's just something that you have to learn to be comfortable with. So learning to just not compare yourself and to take your journey as your own and taking responsibility for that.
Yeah, and really quickly, I just be kind to yourself, and mental health is very important. Grad school, it's a lot of work, but then it can be really fascinating, and it's the journey along the way. So it's a rare moment where you get to read, you get paid to read and to write and to explore your ideas, but at the same time, also be kind to yourself and make mental health a priority for long-term grad success. That's what I would say.
Don't go to a place where you'll have to take out debt. I know
Oh, that's a
people
big one.
have said it.
That's a big one if you didn't know that. Yeah, thank you, Greg.
You're not going to get rich, but you should
Yep.
make enough money that you can live on it.
And a thing to ask
Can't go somewhere else.
Yeah, a thing to ask when you get in relatedly to that, most places will offer you a 5-year funding package. In the majority of fields with the majority of preparation, 5 years is insufficient to do your coursework and write a dissertation. So you want to find out from them, how do I get funded into my 6th and 7th years? Most places have ways of doing this. They should be able to tell you. If you get a lot of hand waving, that's also a red flag. You don't want to be in that. You don't want to have 5 years into a PhD program and be faced with the choice of taking out more student debt or abandoning a project that you sunk that much time into.
That's a really concrete one to end on. I like that. You pay for your BA, pay for your MA, but your PhD, you're kind of hired as a paraprofessional. You're in there, and like Ian said, you're not going to get rich. But the last thing on that is one misperception is that you're putting a life on hold. You're not, and you can ask Daniel and Chantal. You're not. You're a grown up, and there are families in student housing, young families growing up in student housing. The only difference is they pay a lot less in rent than their neighbors. They're probably in a really nice neighborhood, and you're in graduate student housing, really safe with a toddler running around or whatever it is that you've got for your family situation. The only difference is you're probably paying about a third the rent of your neighbors who are not in graduate student housing. So your life is off to the races when you're in a PhD program. That's a misperception that I had. A lot of family members like you guys, Daniel mentioned first generation, they're all at the Thanksgiving table saying, what the hell are you doing? You're going to be a student forever. But this is a paraprofessional, and it's a professional. You're a professional. You're a historian. So this is, I really appreciate your time, guys, and your contacts for helping to guide our students. This has been really, really valuable. Please, everybody, join me within a virtual round of applause. One day we'll see you guys in person. But one thing this pandemic does is opens up channels for this, and these kind of really, really great information sessions. I learned a lot, and I know these guys did too. So thank you so much. Thanks everybody for joining us.
Thank you so much for having us. Thanks especially to Daniel and Chantal for helping us out for the princely compensation at some point. And please, we are not just saying email us if you have questions, or if we really want to hear from you. If there's a question that wasn't addressed, or if there's just something that didn't come up but you are looking for some more guidance, reach out to us. We'd like this conversation to continue.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining.
Hey, thank you so much for hosting, Jeremy.
Thank you, guys. Bye.
Thanks a lot.